I'm going to talk about the use of IT to foster economic development from a government's perspective, and you could even say the use of e-government to foster economic development. If you look at what drives e-government in most places, I'd say it's three things. One is to reduce costs, the cost of government, is to rebuild the relationship with citizens and businesses, and is to facilitate economic development. And if you look at these three things, I think it's the last one that has become more important right now. The reasons for that is because governments are realizing, well, the cost savings aren't that immediate. I think there's still a case to be made for cost savings, but governments are starting to realize that it requires investment, and the cost savings are further down the road. And the same as rebuilding the relationship. There's all kinds of, they're learning there's all kinds of re-engineering of services that have to be met. There's all kinds of new issues like encouraging people to use these services, getting them on the web, digital divide, and all these sort of things. So that's going to take longer to meet as well. But in the meantime, economic development, two things are happening, as we heard in the last panel. And they seem like a bit of a paradox, because on the one hand, we're in an economic downturn right now. But on the other hand, e-commerce isn't dead. The burst of the dot-com bubble, it's strange, but as you know, in the tourism sector, e-commerce in the year 2002 has never been higher. So governments, if you see these two things, and you need to boost your economy, and you look what's happening with e-commerce, there's a match there. And if you look at something like the Spanish tourism portal, well, this is a classic e-government project. It addresses the G2C, the G2G, the G2B, all these different areas that we talk about. It addresses them all. But really, that's not what it's all about. It's an e-government project, but the main thing is that it's an economic development project. I think that's what really hits home. And if we look at economic development today, I mean, there's two things governments are trying to do. One is that they're trying to appeal to inward investment, and the other aspect is that they're trying to help their own local firms step out and be major players in the global markets. And so the internet has to help in both respects. And generally, when you're talking about economic development, this falls under the G2B category of e-government, I would say. And then here there's three areas which I'll go into in greater detail. E-procurement, and this takes on many forms, from electronic tenders and putting catalogs online to new ways of interacting with the business communities which governments have never done before. Services and transactions to the business community, and creating an enabling environment that your jurisdiction is a good place to do e-commerce and e-business in. The government marketplace for many companies, especially smaller companies, it's very difficult to access opportunities, public procurement opportunities. Suppliers lack the capacity to search for new calls for tenders, and what the internet does is that it opens this up to a much greater participants. And so you have more participants in the public marketplace. That in itself is going to generate economic stimulation. Now, public procurement it's not like in the private sector where basically you just want the cheapest product or the most who's going to get the job done the best. There's other factors there's social and economic factors that come into play in public procurement. All these kind of policies which have to be taken into account. So the web offers new opportunities to be able to implement these policies, and I just I list some of the benefits to businesses here. One thing I'll just take online reverse auctions as an example of it's a major departure of the way governments have traditionally bought goods and have interacted with the marketplace. The traditional government tender is you submit a bid, you have one chance to make your bid, it's in a sealed envelope, and you open it, and either you win it or you lose it. Now, what online reverse auctions do is that you can make as many bids as you want until you get the contract. And now, there's a place for these. It's, it's almost driven solely by price, and so it doesn't really take value for money into account and all these things. But for some things, price is the only factor. And I'll give you an example here in the state of Pennsylvania in the United States. At 9 o'clock in the morning, they set up an auction for rock salt, and they use salt to put on the roads. You probably don't have the problem here in Spain, but in Pennsylvania, when you get lots of ice and snow on the roads, you have to buy salt to melt the ice so you can drive. So a year's supply of rock salt, it started at 9 o'clock in the morning at $33 million US. And by 6 o'clock in the evening, it was down to 30.5 million. So the government itself saved $2.5 million. But the interesting thing from the business side of it is that there were 9 bidders. There were 9 companies bidding for this, which traditionally they would only have 2 or 3 companies submitting tenders. Because it opens up this whole new way of doing business. So you create much more opportunities for companies out there, and this stimulates growth in the economy. In terms of providing services, governments have thought a lot about how can we shape services for citizens. And they've recognized that the way governments are structured and the way governments think aren't necessarily the way citizens think. So they present on their portals, present services based on life events or customer segments and these sort of things. But, businesses are faced with the same issue. Governments, they're structured by the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Labor, Customs and Excise, the Trade Ministry, all these different ministries which businesses have to deal with. And then you can get into local authorities as well. And businesses don't think that way. Businesses think in terms of finance, marketing, sales, human resources. But all these different, if you think on it as a small hotel operator or a restaurateur, you have to deal with, you have the health inspector coming in one day, you have the alcohol inspector coming in another day, some other inspector. You have to deal with all these people in turn rather than just dealing with all at once in a single package. And so the same way that governments are presenting life episodes to citizens, they need to start presenting, I think, business episodes to businesses as well to make their life easier. And if you can cut the red tape, I guess, for businesses, that's going to that'll have an economic impact. I think that's been shown by a lot of studies. An example here is in Australia. They set up a thing called the Australian Business Register, and so they only have to collect any data, any information from business once, and then use it many times across all of government through any agency. Now this it kind of brings in a kind of a big brother attitude when you think you have this super database holding all this information on every company, and it's used by tax departments, the Trade Department, everybody. But I think the interesting approach they've taken here is that this thing was set up so that it's designed that to be independent of any agency. So the people who manage the thing don't use the data for anything. So, and they control just what the information. So the tax department comes in, and they can only have the information that they're allowed to have. The trade ministry comes in, they can only take the information they're entitled to have. So it's strange. It's a different approach to think that, well, you have some sort of piece of infrastructure here, but there's no government department or anything being in control of it. So this is a way of protecting privacy, and they use XML web services to call on the data that each department's required to use. And for businesses, it simplifies the process just because they just have to interact with this business register and to do all their businesses with government. Customs clearance is another big headache for many businesses. So if you can just go online and do your customs declaration and get a number, just like when you get your, what we heard before, you just get your 6-digit whatever number for your electronic ticket, and you present that to the customs officer, and he keys it in, and then he can tell if there's any, they know if there's anything suspicious or anything to be worried about, then they can decide to inspect it or not. But it basically eliminates the whole way bills process, all the paper documents, so companies can clear their products through customs much quicker. We're talking about an enabling environment. Increasingly, businesses are only going to set up to do business in jurisdictions where they have a proper infrastructure in place to be able to do that, and that includes reliable access to electricity and telecoms, but increasingly to broadband. And it's also important that there's an active IT industry in the country. I think if you see which countries or which jurisdictions are going to succeed down the road, it's the ones that have an active IT industry. And if you don't have that, I would say that the government needs to do something to encourage that to happen. And standards, I think government have an important role in driving standards in the community. This is one quote I like, which I've heard. What I like about standards is that there are so many to choose from. Well, kind of defeats the purpose of standards, of course. But that's what many standards are like, or so-called standards. And so I think government has, especially when you're dealing with the business community, has a role to play to be set a guiding example. And I think a good example here is in the UK, who are the first government, I think, in the world to make it a policy that XML is the standard for all government interactions between different agencies. And this sends out some powerful messages. First of all, if you want to do business with government, you better do it no XML. You better accept this standard. But even beyond that, I think that it says, well, it tells businesses that, well, if the government is committed to this standard, this thing called XML, then maybe we should look into this, and maybe we should make it our standard. And it becomes the standard for e-business as well, for B2B transactions. So it's much more than just government has this, I think, social responsibility in a sense, and so it sends out powerful messages, and what governments do will have a ripple effect throughout the economy. I think e-government also has a role to play in urban regeneration. If you look at communities today, there's massive decline in their traditional economic bases, whether that's manufacturing or agricultural basis. All the jobs are if you look in a place like the UK, they're all leaving the north and going to London. If in a place like France, they're all going to Toulouse or the high tech in Nice or the high tech centers. But where does that leave the places where all the jobs are leaving from? They're basically left with high unemployment, high crime rate, and all these sort of things. And today, we live in a global world where there's competition for everything. There's competition for jobs, for companies, investors, residents, and tourists. And if you're a small business, you feel powerless. If you're a local politician, you feel quite powerless to compete in this global marketplace, because a small business isn't strong enough to become a global player on its own. It's probably even it's not too small even to set up its own website. And you can't set up your website, but then nobody knows about it. So how nobody's ever going to visit it. So what's the point? But there are things which I think communities can do. And I'll give you an example of one thing many communities are doing, are setting up these things called a virtual shopping mall. And I'll use the example in Italy, in the city of Siena, which is many of you probably know, it's a very traditional city. Tourism is its main industry. And it set up the municipality, the town itself, set up a virtual shopping center where any consumer can come in and browse different product windows. And they get local companies to display their products, and they have their own storefronts, and that they have control of it, so that they can update it, add it, put on their specials, their featured products or whatever. Now what this does is that, just like in a shopping center in the physical world, it groups all these stores together. So you're not alone out there. You're with all the other stores, and you'll get much more traffic that way. And as we heard earlier too, one of the problems with e-commerce is people don't really trust giving their credit card detail to some little, Sam's Corner shop who they might not trust if they don't know they received their product. But knowing that it has the backing of the municipality, it gives people this confidence that, okay, well, if the municipality is backing it, then this must be a valid business, that I'm not going to get ripped off here. And in fact, the whole payment system is handled by one of the major banks in Italy. So you're actually paying to through a bank as well. So it gives that security for people coming in. And when you're doing these sort of things, you have to decide, what businesses are you going to let on? In Siena, they want to use it to promote the town itself as part of the whole tourism promotion. So it has to be typical products of the region. So things like wine and jewelry, which it's famous for. These sort of kind of tourism products. And most of the people who buy there, they found are people who have come to Siena as tourists and maybe bought some jewelry and taken it home. And then when they get home, somebody else, they like that. So they come back and they revisit Siena virtually to buy more of what they've already bought there. And this is, and about half their sales are to the U.S. and it's pretty much people who have been there as tourists who are coming back. But in other cities who have done this thing, they leave it to the Chamber of Commerce, for example, to decide who should be the thing. There has to be strict rules, I guess, who gets on and who doesn't get on. But I think the main principle here is that cities maintain shopping precincts. They clean the streets, the high streets, for where all your shops is. So why shouldn't they do this for the bricks and mortar stores? So why shouldn't you do it for your online stores as well? Because what we live in the reality is that we live in a mixed economy, and we talked quite a bit in the last session about the use of intermediaries in the tourism industry, and. But this is something, when it comes to the online world, governments haven't really looked at this use of intermediaries, third-party intermediaries for delivering their public services. But this is probably the best way of both doing e-government, getting public services widely accepted, as well as bringing in local, allowing local e-commerce sites to add value to their products. I'll give you an example of a model here. In the United States, you have to register to vote. If you don't register, you can't vote. It's as simple as that. And one of the biggest problems, especially amongst young people, of why voter turnout is so low in the U.S. is because they just don't register in the first place. Young people just can't be bothered filling out the forms and sending it, or dealing with some government bureaucracy to just to register to vote. So. What happened in the last presidential election in 2000 is you could register to vote online, but not on a government website. On different portals and websites like MTV website, like MSN and Yahoo and AOL, different websites where young people would go to every day in the course of their normal life. and you could register to vote those days. And the way this model worked here is they'd come into the commercial portal, and then they'd have an online, and then the commercial portal would have a transaction, in this case a company called election.com, which would go out and sell its service, and then election.com would have the relationship with the back office. If you only have a few players, then you could have a direct link to the commercial portals. But if you really want to spread out wide and get as many players as well, the government agency probably doesn't want to deal with all that many people. So you can use a few service provider channels. But I think what's important here is that, I mean, basically this is the idea of franchising, and it's no different that if I want to buy my fishing license in Canada, I'm not going to buy it at a government agency. I'm going to buy it from where I buy my fishing tackle, my bait, or even in a gas station or something like this. Or if I buy my bus ticket, I don't have to buy it from the bus driver. I can buy it from a news agent or something. It's the same idea. So this happens already in the the physical world. So why doesn't it happen in the virtual world? When you do these sort of things, I think it's important that you don't enter into exclusive arrangements with any one provider, because that's not allowing all the other people to add value to their services. And that's the interest for the commercial provider, that it allows them to add value to their service. And if you think in a tourism perspective, well, applying for your passport through an online travel agent is a classic example. And why would an online travel agent want to provide this passport service? Well, because it's one more reason to attract people to their site. If they know they can book their holiday and apply for their passport all in one go, all in one place, they're going to drive traffic to their site. And it's in government's interest because, as I said, you spread a commercial website can reach more people in one day than a government website will be able to reach in 1 month or even 1 year. That's just the reality. And when you enter into these service things, of course, you'll want to have some sort of quality of service agreements, like the site has to be up 24/7. There'll be data protection regulations that have to be met. And the customer relationship has to be managed end to end. So, for example, if you apply for a passport or file your taxes or something through this route, and the government agency then has a question, it has to be of that citizen. It has to be able to use the same route to go back and ask that question. A good example of this, I think, is in South Africa, where basically, there was a certain demand for filing income tax online in South Africa, but it wasn't a huge demand because, in South Africa, not that many people have internet access. But it wanted to meet that demand, but it didn't really want to invest the huge amounts of money in development costs and then managing the site and everything like this. So what it did is it allowed 5 consortia to provide the service for them. And these consortia, they're usually made up of technology companies in partnership with accountancy firms and these sort of things. And they're required, one of the service level agreement is that they must issue all their customers digital certificates. So what this is doing is it's helping drive digital certificates out into the wider the wider use, and they must set up a 24-hour help desk and things like this. And so this is a way that the government is stimulating the new economy and business. This is business for these guys. And this brings us into the realm of public-private partnerships. And this is a term that's kind of bountied around. It means many different things to many different people. But I think the key thing is that it's the idea that you're bringing in private sector innovation and enterprise, because these private e-filing firms can market their services much better than governments can. So you're bringing in this private sector expertise, together with the public sector's own experience and values. So rather than, if you think of what outsourcing is about, it's supposed to transfer the risk and transfer the rewards to the private company. But I think partnership isn't transferring them; it's sharing them, where you share the risk and then you share with the rewards. And because at the end of the day, I think governments and private sector, they'll be judged on the same standards by people who don't really care who's providing a service, as long as it's good. If you can buy your airplane ticket online, you'll expect it to be able to renew your driver's license online in the same simple process. If you can go online and check your financial your stocks and see how they're doing, you'll want to be able to go online and check your medical records as well. And I think so the governments and businesses have an interest here to play. And if I just conclude, I think e-government, we think of it as online services, but it's more than that. It's providing services differently, which requires the backroom integration and everything. But I believe it's even more than that, and I think this is what governments are starting to see now, is that ultimately it is about leading society out of the industrial age that we're living in into the information age, which is now emerging. And that's my conclusion. Thanks very much.